good. So who is part of the Citizen Scholars Program? All right, so faculty, okay, random people who just are here because you're awesome. All right, great. And who has read the book? Wow, good job, you're awesome. So I think I'll kind of share the story, which you by and large know. And then I would love to kind of open it up to questions about how's Flint doing, questions about book writing, questions about absolutely anything you want. How's that sound? All right. No. Okay. No visuals. And then I know that the other faculty will also have questions as well. So let's start from the very beginning. So what was Flint famous for, which was in the news again today, in regards to this wonderful industry we have this day, before the water crisis? Cars. So almost everybody in Michigan is like 1 degree of separation away from the auto industry. Like raise your hand if like your parents or your aunt or uncle or some family member is affiliated with the car industry or like a subsidiary of the car industry. Okay, so that is how I came to this state. So my father worked for General Motors for 30 plus years as an automotive engineer, worked in Warren at the tech center, inventing things for cars. So Flint, that's where it all started. So that was born in Flint, is cars and General Motors. But I always like to share that even more importantly than the birthplace of cars, and I hope you got this from the book, what else is Flint famous for that happened because of cars? What did those, yeah, so the auto workers. So in the 1930s, Flint auto workers did something totally illegal, totally radical, totally disobedient. What did they do? They striked. So this was called the historic Flint sit-down strike. So they sat down. They sat down and literally occupied a series of car plants in Flint. And that shut down production in Flint. They stopped making cars. And it was, we just had the anniversary a few weeks ago of the sit-down strike. So for 44 days, they sat down in the cold Michigan winter. It started on December 31st and ended sometime in February in the 1930s. And they were demanding a fair share of prosperity. So they were demanding living wages. And they were demanding, better working conditions. Like people were getting their fingers cut off, and if they were painting blue cars, they were coughing up blue paint, blue, sputum that night. So they protested. And my favorite part of the story, and one of the heroes I highlight in the book, is a woman named Janora Dollinger Johnson. Do you guys remember reading about her? So she was a badass Flint activist in the 1930s. Sorry, I don't know if I can say that. So she was young. Her husband was one of the auto workers, one of the main organizers. And unlike most spouses of movements, they didn't just bring like coffee and donuts to their husbands on the line. Like they were actively involved in this movement, in this resistance, in this really incredible act of disobedience. They were battling like the police officers and the company thugs, a lot of the women, and they were called the Women's Brigade, and they wore red berets. So nobody knew what was going to happen, and then finally, the Michigan governor at the time, my favorite Michigan governor, his name is Frank Murphy. Has anybody heard of Frank Murphy? He is like the best Michigan governor of all time. His time as a governor was very limited because he got, because of what he did in Flint by and large. But then he went on to do great things. He went on to become a Supreme Court justice, one of our U.S. Supreme Court justices, and he was the dissenting opinion in the Korematsu case. Who knows what that is? Go ahead.
It's the case about the Japanese internment.
Japanese internment. So it was a different kind of ban for a different kind of people back in the day. So he was the dissenting opinion. He was the first person to ever use the word racism in a Supreme Court case. And he was the Michigan governor at that time. So he did something that nobody expected. He stopped the strike, and he sided with the workers. President Roosevelt also got involved. And he sided with the workers, which allowed their union to be recognized. And their union was the UAW. And that led to something called the Grand Bargain, which was amazing. It was really a great deal. It meant living wages. It meant healthcare and housing and great schools and great infrastructure. And people from all over the country, especially the Great Migration North, moved to Flint for these great jobs. Immigrants from all over the world came to Flint for these great living wage jobs. And that deal that was struck influenced wages really across the country for decades. And this is like the hardest thing that I even believe to this day. But at one point, the people of Flint had the highest per capita income in the country. Can you believe that? So in 1970s, not even that long ago, in the 1970s, Flint had the highest per capita income. People of Flint made the most money of anywhere in the country. Isn't that amazing? And because of that, they had some of the best public health indices. They were some of the healthiest people. So what changed after that?
The big three pulled out.
What's that?
The big three pulled out.
The big three pulled out. So it was General Motors by and large mainly. So GM, mainly man-made policy decisions, by and large left. At one point, General Motors employed over 90,000 people in Flint. Our population isn't even 90,000 people right now. So it's about 5,000-ish less right now. So decisions that led to disinvestment, which created unemployment, poverty, violence, population loss, crumbling schools, violence, and really every disparity that you can think of in Flint. Policy decisions, man-made decisions, driven by greed, driven by racism, and driven by neglect, that put Flint in this near bankruptcy, dire situation. And in 2011, because of this kind of financial state of the city, what happened to Flint in this near bankruptcy state? We became under emergency management. So the state said, we're gonna come in and we're gonna take over the city and we're gonna fix your finances. So we were under financial emergency management, and the emergency manager reported to whom? The governor. So the emergency manager reported to the governor, and their job really was austerity, which means to save money. And really no matter what the cost. So the emergency manager came in, we had a series of about 4 emergency managers, and it was all about cost cutting, cost cutting, cost cutting, cost cutting. And it was decided that the water that we had been buying from Detroit, Great Lakes water from Lake Huron, was too expensive for this near bankrupt city. And that instead, to save money, we would start drawing water from the local Flint River until a new pipeline to the Great Lakes was to be built. So in April of 2014, so we're approaching kind of, what is this, about 5-year anniversary soon. So in April 2014, with a very simple press of a button, and this was televised, the mayor pressed the button, drank a glass of water, we started drawing water from the local Flint River. And anybody from Flint here? Yeah? Okay, is your family still there? No? So right away, the people of Flint were heroic and brave, and they knew something was wrong. And in every house it was different, but it was brownish in some houses and greenish and yellowish, and it smelled weird in some places, and it tasted even weirder in other places. And it differed everywhere. It turned out that the treatment of the water was missing an important ingredient. It was missing something called corrosion control, which made it about 20 times more corrosive than the water that we had been getting from the Great Lakes. And just a few months into this water switch, so the water switch was in April, in November of that same year, 2014, General Motors, which was born in Flint, still has a plant in Flint, noticed that this water was corroding their engine parts. And they were allowed at that time to go back to Great Lakes water. But throughout, the state was telling everybody to relax, that everything was okay, and that everything was in compliance. But was it okay, guys? No. So during this whole time that this was happening, I was kind of doing my job as a pediatrician, MSU faculty. So MSU has been in Flint for over a century. MSU has, as a land-grant university, has had a footprint in Flint, first in the extension and the agricultural capacity. The medical school in Flint has been there for about 50 years. I was a medical student here, and And Flint was my campus as a medical student. So MSU was the very first community-based medical school. So I did my clinical training in Flint about 20 years ago. That's where I first kind of fell in love with the city and fell in love with the discipline of pediatrics. And then MSU in 2014-ish did a really deep dive into public health. So MSU has always kind of been in Flint. So I was practicing as a pediatrician, a medical educator, teaching medical students, teaching residents throughout this time. And throughout this time, patients would come to clinic and they would ask, because they were concerned about what they were seeing on TV and because of their own water quality. Is this water safe? Should I be mixing, for example, my baby's powdered formula with this drinking water? Should I be bathing my children in this water? We're on a big kick, drink more water, 8 glasses a day. Good job drinking water. Is that right? Are you sure I should drink water instead of pop or soda? And throughout this time, I was reassuring my patients, yeah, of course the water is okay. Like, do not waste your money on bottled water or this thing that they call nursery water. How can our water not be okay? Because it's America, right? We're in America, the richest country in the history of the world. It's the 21st century. Like, as you can tell from reading my book, I take a lot of intersections into history. And it's not like boring false history. Hopefully it wasn't for you. It's like captivating history. And I talk about like 19th century London with the raging cholera epidemics. We've come a long way in terms of water treatment. Civilizations are built on water treatment. So it's America, it's the 21st century, but it's Michigan, right? You guys are like, what are we surrounded by?
Water.
Water! We're surrounded by the Great Lakes. And the Great Lakes are the largest source of fresh water in the world. 21% of the fresh water in the world is around Michigan. Can you believe it? The largest source of fresh water in the world. But despite all that, despite being America in the 21st century, and despite being surrounded by all the water in the world, there's rules, right? There's rules and there's regulations, and there's people and scientists who wake up every single day to make sure that when any of us turn on our tap, no matter where we live, no matter the color of our skin, when we turn on our tap, our water is safe, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I thought. I was wrong. So it wasn't okay. And there were so many red flags throughout this time that were being ignored. The water, like I said, was so corrosive that it ate up our pipes, it ate up our plumbing. I admit that I didn't even know about the possibility, my eyes didn't see the possibility of lead in the water before this. And as a pediatrician, both in Flint and Detroit, I have taken care of hundreds of kids with lead poisoning. And as doctors, we're like detectives. And we try to find out what could be causing this kid's lead poisoning. Is it the paint? Is it the dust? Is it the soil? Is he, is it chewing on a toy that might have the paint? Or is it like a herb or makeup? We would be sleuths and try to figure out what could be causing these kids' exposure to lead. And never once in my differential, which is what we call our list of possible diagnoses, did I ever know about the possibility of lead in water before all this. And it really kind of speaks to my naiveness, because what does lead mean? Who knows what lead means? What's the elemental symbol for lead? Pb, which comes from the Latin plumbum, which means plumbing. So lead actually means plumbing. So when the Romans built their aqueducts, they used lead plumbing. You can Google and find pictures of like Roman plumbing made of lead plumbing. And there's actually strong theories that hypothesize the demise of the Romans is because they used so much lead. But they didn't just put it in plumbing, they also put it in their food, like they did like lead salts and stuff, so totally not recommended. So we've been using lead in our plumbing for a long time, despite really knowing what it can do to people. And the lead industry, and I talk about this in the book, is totally evil, and pushed it in gasoline, pushed it in paint, and pushed it in plumbing because of profits, because they had patents on things, because they were making money, and continued to expose people. So not until 1986 did we restrict the use of lead in our service lines, which are the water lines that go from people's houses to the front of their houses. But not until 2014 did we restrict the use of lead from brass fixtures and faucets, which are, we turn on our faucets, those fixtures where the water comes out. So as an example, Flint schools had some of the highest water lead levels, hundreds and thousands of parts per billion. But big buildings don't have lead lines. It was corroding the fixtures and faucets, and it was coming out of that. Our lead levels throughout the city were all over the place. The EPA has something called a maximum contaminant level goal for lead, which is 0 parts per billion, because they recognize that there is no safe level of lead. But that's not their enforceable standard. Their action level for a water system is set at 15 parts per billion, which is too high. The bottled water standard set by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is set at 5 parts per billion, which is also too high. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends 1 part per billion, especially for school and childcare facilities. Throughout the city, we were seeing numbers in the hundreds and thousands and multiples of thousands. There was a home, I think the highest level I saw was 22,000 parts per billion. My lowest day in this whole story was when a home that across from the hospital that takes care of like foster kids and abused and neglected kids had a lead level of 5,000 parts per billion. So sky high levels kind of throughout the city. The folks at the EPA actually said it was like we were drinking through lead painted straws, never really knowing when a piece of scale was going to come off and be like drinking water. And you can't see lead in water. You remember the pictures of like brown water from Flint? That was from iron corrosion that created that rusty color. But lead in water, we don't see. It's invisible, it's odorless, it's tasteless. So when I heard as a pediatrician about lead being possibly in our water, as you can remember from the book, I freaked out. My life changed because of what lead does. It's probably the most well-studied neurotoxins known to man. We've known what lead has done for centuries, but in the last few years, the last few decades, the science is increasingly clear of what it does to children. It erodes cognition. It actually drops IQ levels, twists behavior, so leads to developmental problems, ADHD kind of issues, conduct disorders. It's even been linked to criminality. We also now know of its epigenetic impact, how it can really kind of modify expressions of DNA and have these multi-generational impacts. Because of this science, we are now at the point of saying that there's no safe level of lead exposure based on what the CDC says, the American Academy of Pediatrics says. And what we're supposed to do as in the public health world is something called primary prevention. We're never supposed to expose a population to lead because there is no treatment. It's irreversible. It's an irreversible neurotoxin, and we should be preventing exposure. I also freaked out because I know that lead is a form of environmental injustice, a form of environmental racism. The burden of lead does not fall equally on our nation's children. Kids in Flint already had higher lead levels, just like kids in Detroit and Chicago and Philadelphia and Baltimore, because of legacy lead use, because of deteriorating homes, because of poor nutrition, because of many things. These children who are already burdened with so many of kind of life's toxicities had these higher rates of exposure. So kind of when I heard this, quickly conducted the research to see what was happening to the kids, and wasn't surprised because there was lead in the water. It was getting into our children. And that's when I did this academic no-no. So as faculty members, what do we do when we have research? How do we share our research?
Publish.
We publish. How long does that take?
Conference or journal, maybe a year.
So maybe a year.
Yeah.
So when you do research as an academic, it has to go through that peer review process, which is this age-old tradition where your peers review your work, make sure it's sound, they give you feedback, it goes back and forth. That takes a long time. That takes months. Even the expedited process takes months and sometimes years. And our kids in Flint really didn't have another day. So I literally kind of walked out of my clinic and I stood at a press conference behind a podium and shared this research that our children were in harm's way and that we needed to act. So my favorite accolade, which was not mentioned, that I received, which is all too awkward and too many, was a disobedience award from MIT. Their first ever disobedience award for this act of academic disobedience, which was awesome, but very difficult to explain to my children that I got like a disobedience award. They're like, what? Why do I have to go to bed? So right away, so I was excited. I was sharing science and facts And I'm like, nobody's gonna like argue facts and science. Like this is clear, there's lead in the water, it's in our kids, here's my graphs. Like, how could anybody, we're gonna have change happen? So I felt good for like a minute. And then right away, the state said I was wrong. They said my numbers were wrong. They said I was splicing and dicing numbers. They called me an unfortunate researcher, that I was causing near hysteria, which is also sexist. And it said that the data that they had, because they also had a lot of the surveillance data, wasn't consistent with my data. So multiple arms of the state were kind of attacking me and my work, my credibility, which shouldn't have been a surprise because everybody in the story who had raised a concern, the moms, the activists, the pastors, the journalists, the water scientists, were also attacked and dismissed. But nothing can really prepare you for that, and the book really kind of goes through that, and this is kind of one of the biggest lessons that I want to share. When the state said I was wrong, and they have tons of scientists, they have tons of epidemiologists, they had a larger data set than I had, it's hard not to second guess yourself. I thought I was wrong. I felt this big. I felt tiny, so small. I felt defeated. I said to myself, like, I should have just minded my own business, closed my eyes, gone about my work, mom, busy wife, busy pediatrician, and let somebody else deal with this. That lasted a quick second. And then I kind of quickly realized that this didn't have anything to do with me, but this had everything to do with the children that, as a physician, I have literally taken an oath to protect and to stand up for. My job as a doctor is, in my job description, is to be an advocate for kids. But implicit in the story is that, doctor or not, we have all taken an oath to stand up and to fight for injustice that happens all around us. So that's very much all of our civic responsibility, all of our really kind of responsibility as humans to take care of each other. So it was also the recognition that my research, my statistics, my numbers, my facts, every little number was not a number, it was a kid. It was really a kid. And I probably even seen one of those kids, those kids in the last year or so. And it was ultimately those kids that kind of really gave me the courage to fight back, and to fight back with more numbers and more evidence and science. So it was very much kind of our persistence, our teamwork, and our science that spoke truth to power. And finally, it took a while, but finally the state did concede and came back saying, yes, our numbers are consistent with your numbers, there was a problem. And then, we really quickly went into the mode of recovery. I wrote this book there's many lessons in this book, which you've probably picked up on. But in my audience, this book was written for you guys. It was written for students. It was, the title of the book is What the Eyes Don't See. That's about lead and water we don't see. We don't see the effects of lead. It's known as a silent pediatric epidemic. But it's bigger and broader than all of that. It's about people and places and problems that we choose not to see. Flint was neglected. Flint was ignored. That was those people over there. That's their problem. I'm going to just keep my eyes closed, and somebody else will take care of that. But this story is really about all of our responsibility to be awake, to be alert for injustices that are happening all around us, everywhere. But it's more important than just being awake. We have to act, even when it's scary, even when it's hard, even when it may seem impossible. This book is a testament to the idea that individuals working together can make a difference. This book is all about teamwork. One of the reasons I didn't want to write this book, I'm like, it's not about me. Like, I'm like the one tiny part of the story. It's about folks that came together. Multidisciplinary, ragtag, unexpected collection of people. And so often, especially in academia, in our careers, we become hyper-specialized. Like, I want to hang out with the pediatricians who do this kind of work, and the industrial engineers hang out together, and the English professors hang out together. So this is a lesson that we need to step out of our boxes and work with folks who are very different than us. Like, my best friend in this story was a water engineer from middle of nowhere, Virginia, who couldn't have been more different than me, but probably cared about kids more than I cared about kids. So one of the beauties of this book is about finding your team, finding your village. We often think we're alone in many of these fights, but we're not alone. There's lots of folks who care about the same things that we do. So those are kind of some of the bigger kind of lessons of the story. Another reason I wrote this book is because it has a lot of kind of national relevance right now. This book is it's not isolated. The story is not isolated. It's about really the deeper crises we're in regards to disintegrating infrastructure due to inequality and austerity. It's about a breakdown in democracy. Flint lost democracy because we were under emergency management, but that is no different than voter suppression, no different than gerrymandering, no different than mass incarceration. Those are all assaults on democracy. This book is about environmental injustice, probably the most egregious example of environmental injustice in this century. But environmental injustices have always been there and continue to this day, where people who are poor, people who are minority disproportionately suffer from the burden of environmental contamination. Southwest Detroit has the worst air quality in our state, and it's a poor minority population. This is a story on really our assault on children, how we really have minimal policies that protect our kids, and our actions speak to that. We have one of the highest child poverty rates of any developed country. Look at school shooting issues, our inaction on gun violence, lead in bullets, lead in water, what's happening at the border, separating kids and families. So it speaks to our larger kind of commitment to children. But fundamentally, it's this bigger story about how we care for each other. I think if you read the book, you also realized, and maybe you were surprised, that this is not just a Flint book. You're like, what's all this family and personal stuff in here? And that was very deliberate. And I think it only became more important after the last presidential election. This is an immigrant story. This is about a kid who came to this country when I was 4 years old. And we came here fleeing tyranny, fleeing oppression, fleeing a dictatorship. And we came here for what everybody comes to this country for freedom, for opportunity, for democracy. And for me and my family, that American dream was absolutely realized. And I am so privileged to wake up every day lucky to be in this country, but also very much cognizant of what injustice can be and what people in power can do to vulnerable populations. And that is a timely story for right now, because there are kids that look just like me, similar skin color, who are trying to come to this country for the same reasons, yet Lady Liberty's arms are not open as wide as it used to be. So that is also very much embedded in the story, that immigrant story, which is obviously very timely right now as we talk about walls and bans. So I think I will just kind of stop there, and I would love to entertain your questions or comments or absolutely anything you want to ask. And we can talk about how Flint's doing or anything. Yes. Tell me your name and what's your major.
I'm Katie. I'm an acting major here.
Acting? That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you.
So people sometimes tell me, they're like, you speak pretty good in public. Like, why? I'm like, I was in drama club in high school.
So
Awesome. Cool.
I guess basically, I'm just kind of wondering, since you wrote the book, because the book came out in 2018, but I'm sure that it was finished before then.
Not that much earlier.
But I'm just kind of wondering how Flint's doing now and how it's changed.
Yeah. So the hardest part about writing this book was figuring out how to end it, because the story continues. To this day in Flint, we are still on bottled water and filtered water because our damaged lead pipes are being replaced. And that takes time. There's only 2 other cities in this country that have replaced their lead pipes. Lansing, Michigan, amazingly, and Madison, Wisconsin. That's it. Flint will be the 3rd city in the country that has replaced their lead pipes. When you do that infrastructure work, it disrupts the lead that's underneath, and that's why people still need to be on precautions. However, that's going to be done this year. So we think summer of 2019, the pipe replacements will be done. So that's the pipes. Let's talk about the people. How are the people doing? So right when we recognized that we had this population-wide lead exposure, we framed it as an added toxicity, as an added toxic stress. There's this growing recognition in the field of pediatrics and public health of the role of early adversity and how that impacts children in a very kind of graded and predictable way. Lead was just one part of this crisis. We also had one of the largest outbreaks of Legionnaire's disease, which is a pneumonia that older people get. People died, and that's why we have homicide charges against some of the state officials. We also had a lot of skin issues, but by and large, this was a crisis of trust. It was a betrayal, and people have raw emotions of anger and fear and guilt and anxiety and stress, and just those emotions can lead to poor outcomes. So we are holistically treating this crisis, and we put in a plan for the interventions right when we kind of recognize the scope of this issue. So we have really kind of built this model public health program, and MSU is kind of at the lead here. I now direct something called the Michigan State University and Hurley Children's Hospital Pediatric Public Health Initiative, which is this kind of sleeves rolled up effort to improve the outcomes of Flint kids very broadly, working hand in hand with many organizations from academia to nonprofits, but most importantly working hand in hand with the people of Flint. So we have formalized that process. We have a parent partners group where there's parents who kind of advise us as partners in our work, but we also listen closely to our kids. Our Flint kids are amazing, and they are smart, and they are brilliant. We have a youth advisory council, and they've just renamed themselves the Flint Kids Justice League. So our kids are also very much informing our work. All of MSU's work in Flint is really built on this community-informed, community participatory, community-driven process, and we espouse that as well. So what we've been able to build with all of our partners are things like expansion of home visiting programs, 2 brand new child care centers, near universal preschool, literacy expansion, breastfeeding support, mobile grocery stores, Medicaid expansion, mindfulness, school health services. The list kind of goes on what we've been able to bring into Flint and continue to advocate for. Shortly after the crisis, I created a fund at our community foundation called the Flint Kids Fund. We've raised $20 million. One of the reasons I wrote this book is part of the proceeds go back to that fund. We've given out $7 million, and that has funded, for example, playgrounds and other kind of evidence-based development promoting interventions. I'm going to talk about my favorite thing that we're doing, which is around early literacy. Which is books for kids and reading with kids. So in places like Flint, there's 1 book for every 300 children. So imagine that, like when you were a little kid, or if you have little kids in your family, 1 children's book for every 300 kids. And there's a word deficit. So by the time our kids have reached the age of 3, they've heard about 30 million less words. By 18 months of age, you see evidence of that achievement gap. By kindergarten, it's almost impossible to bridge that gap. So we've massively expanded our work around early literacy. I received a small grant that launched something called Flint Kids Read. And then we got lots of other resources, and this Flint Kids Fund helps. So now in Flint, we are part of the Imagination Library program, where every kid in Flint gets a book mailed to them every single month from the ages 0 to 5. 70,000 books have been mailed so far. We've also expanded something called Reach Out and Read, which is an evidence-based program that is in doctor's offices that gives books at every well child visit. About 40,000 books have been given through that program. We launched something called Born to Read. Babies born at the hospital get bundles of books and get signed up for these programs. We celebrated our 1,000th baby in that program. And that program is funded by the NBA, the National Basketball Players Association. So the NBA union, the basketball players who've been amazing, is supporting that intervention. So massively, and we're also working on 2-generation literacy, so parents and grandparents who have literacy issues. So this is just one example of one thing that we're doing to improve outcomes in Flint and to kind of holistically improve children's development. Other questions? Yes, sir.
The water engineer from West Virginia, if I remember correctly, he had a lot of flack thrown at him because every city he visited, he would always pull lead in the water. Did that affect the how you guys continued going forward, or did you guys continue to persevere?
Sure. Yeah.
I remember talking to his students once, and they were super cool and interesting to me, and they showed us some of the pipes, and they did a lot of showing of that. I was just curious on how he personally dealt with it because we never got to talk to him.
So Mark Edwards is the water engineer from Virginia Tech, who has been doing lead and water work for decades. He uncovered the Washington, D.C. lead and water disaster, which was about a decade ago, and he had to work for about 6 years to uncover that. It was being covered up by multiple federal agencies. So he's one of the kind of world's leaders on lead and water issues. He was the one that worked over a decade ago with Bridge Monero when he was the mayor, when he was still a state senator, then a mayor of Lansing, to get Lansing's lead pipes replaced. So when he came into Flint, he did the water testing, and he didn't just do it himself, he did something really cool. It was called citizen science. So he worked hand in hand with the residents of Flint, and they scientifically collected water samples throughout the city, from all 9 wards of the city, and were very publicly showing on his website that there was lead in water in all parts of the city. So when he did that, the state also attacked him. They called him a magician that was pulling rabbits out of hats, implying that wherever he went, he would just find lead in water. So yeah, he was also dismissed and discredited, and that was kind of even before I got involved. But he was just speaking science. He just speaks science, and he was very transparently sharing that science and you know, building a coalition. But he obviously persevered, and to this day, he goes all around the country to help similar communities. And that's what I was talking about. So before all this, like, you know, as a pediatrician, I kind of thought that we kind of had a monopoly on caring for kids. Like, who else cares about kids more than pediatricians? And he was the one that proved me so wrong. Like, here was this environmental engineer, like from Virginia, who probably cared about kids more than I did. When he heard from a mom in Flint about lead and water, he literally packed his minivan overnight with grad students and supplies and drove to Flint to do the testing.
Yeah, no, she's super cool. I've met her, by the way.
Leanne Walters.
Yeah, Leanne Walters.
She's awesome. They messed with the wrong mama.
Yeah, they did. She's amazing. Did she get a hold of you as well?
Oh yeah, we were very
Okay.
close. She's awesome. She's awesome, and the students are amazing. So he got pushback. So he is an engineer. So when he did all this work, the engineering community said that he crossed the line, that he never should have gotten out of his ivory tower to become an activist. Whereas in my community, the pediatric medical community, you know, I was very kind of celebrated because this is very much part of our job description. So 2 weeks ago, I wrote an article for the Union of Concerned Scientists called "People Are the Purpose of Science." And academia especially, we get so comfy in our universities and in our classrooms, and also in medicine in our hospitals and clinics, and we rarely step out of those places to get involved in real issues. So part of this book is also kind of a rallying cry for scientists and doctors and academics to take risks, to work in partnership with communities on real problems. So often we write papers that live in journals that nobody reads. So we have to make sure that our work continues to be relevant. And in the book, I talk about kind of John Snow, one of my 19th century public health heroes, who got that and really understood what the purpose of science was. So that kind of speaks to why this book is also relevant, which I touched on. It's about the denial of science. So right now, what are some issues that you hear about where we are denying science?
Climate change.
Climate change. What else?
Vaccines.
Vaccines. So 2 of the hottest topics right now, where we have outbreaks of measles all over this country, where we're not acting on climate change that puts at risk our children or our children's children because of the denial of science. And Flint is this extreme example of what happens when we deny science, common sense science, but ultimately how science prevailed.
Gun control.
What's that?
Gun control.
Gun control, the science of gun control, injury prevention. Absolutely. The CDC is not even allowed to do research on gun control. Yeah.
One of the themes that I was interested in your book is the way that you talk about the relationship between private interests and public interests. And it comes up pretty much throughout the histories, going back to the 20th century with the automotive industry and the relationship between the automotive strikers, for example, and car factories. And then, of course, the sort of privatization of resources. I don't think you talk about it as much, but the privatization of water also. And you talked a little bit in the class about neoliberalism and how one of the tricks of neoliberalism is that it seems to magically convert public goods into private corporate gain.
Mhm.
And so I was wondering if, if you might want to talk a little bit about that sort of balance between private and public. And
Yeah.
I guess one of the larger questions also that I have is, and this is maybe too broad of a question, but I think you point to it in some pretty specific ways. Maybe like, why is our government broken? Because, why is it, for example, that there are all of these people who work in the government who are so excited about refuting all of the data that you come up with? Why were people so excited to refute, Mark Edwards' data-driven studies also in Washington, D.C., years and years before? We elect people, we elect these public officials, and we expect that if they don't do their jobs...
They work for us, we pay them, it's our tax dollars.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And we expect that because they're elected in this democratic way, they're not appointed as emergency managers, at least some of them, right? And yet, it seems like it's not working. So I was just curious what your thoughts on that
So
were.
I'll answer that first. So a lot of investigations, the efforts at accountability to figure out, like, why did this happen? Why was this treated properly? Why did it go on for so long? Why was there a cover-up at the state level? Those are ongoing, and I don't have the answer to the why. Like, I wish, I stay up late at night, like, why didn't they just treat this water properly? Why, when even the EPA told them, you have to do this, they're like, no, we're not gonna do this. So a lot of the investigations that have happened, including one from the Civil Rights Commission, one from the governor's appointed task force on the 5 guys that I talked about in the book that looked into the water issue, really point to the culture of these bureaucracies. And especially in the Department of Environmental Quality, they point to the culture of minimal compliance, the culture of permit granting, but also the issue of environmental injustice. And this was also brought up by the Civil Rights Commission, that because the demographics of the population was predominantly poor and predominantly minority, people that we choose not to see, that it continued for this long and that it was allowed to happen. So a treatment for all this is that the DEQ was required to have like intro to public health classes. Like, hey, you're doing water treatment, but that's actually public health. And back in the day, the Office of Drinking Water in Michigan was actually under the Public Health Department. Now it's changed, and the new governor is trying to even reorganize more things to make drinking water, more accountable as a public good. It shouldn't matter where you live. But I don't have the answer. I don't know why. So this book really grapples with kind of my belief in government. And I'm a believer, I'm an optimist. I believe that government can right historic wrongs. I believe that government can be a lever to bring equality and justice, especially restorative justice. So for me, who wasn't naive, who kind of had a history in growing up of knowing what governments can do to people, like I didn't come into this like totally naive, but I couldn't even cross my mind that, poor people and not poor people, one city, another city could have different drinking water, it's unfathomable. It's a public good. If we do not believe that government can protect our public welfare, not just privileged kids, but all kids, then who are we? Who are we as a society? Who are we as a democracy? Who are we as a government if we cannot guarantee that public good? And that is definitely a question that I raise in this book, that I hope that people talk more about and try to figure out, because is water a human right? The United Nations says it is, but we don't treat it as it is. Before Flint was a water quality issue, it was a water affordability issue. To this day, it's a water affordability issue. The people of Flint were paying the highest water rates in the country for water that they shouldn't have even been drinking. The United Nations got involved in Detroit and Flint because of all the shutoffs, because people's water was being shut off. Is it not a public good? Is it not a human right? It's not in this country.
Hi, my name is Mohammed. I'm a graduate student here.
Awesome.
I'm originally from Iraq.
Yay, marhaba.
Yeah. It's kind of scary what you say a while ago when you say people deny the facts and science, and basically try your best not just to publish and be useful for your study and career, and they still deny at the beginning. But how did you deal with that? I mean, how that was? I mean, it's really scary how to. I mean, you just present facts, and this is not your opinion, it's just actual facts.
Yeah.
And how did you deal with that?
Well, you should read the book. So I put a blanket over my head and I crawled into a ball and I thought I was going to throw up. And my heart rate went up and I had a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. It was hard. Like, it was physically and emotionally and mentally very difficult to present facts and to have it be attacked. But ultimately, like, you know, there was this growing team and growing consensus and a growing role in the media, which played an incredible part of the story. So after my press conference where I shared these facts, it finally became a national story. So there's been all these studies of like the media attention in Flint. And after our press conference, it was like the first national peak in the story. So media started to pay attention, which I think also created kind of this national embarrassment for the state, which also helped them to concede. But there was a growing kind of consensus and a growing kind of energy that also kind of lifted me forward and gave me the courage also to kind of fight back. But it was not easy. But sometimes when you do things that are right, it's not easy. You know, it's hard and there's pushback and it's scary and you don't know if you're going to come out on the other end, and you might have just risked your career and your job and your family and everything else. But you do it because it's the right thing to do.
So it's also scary that people with power, they don't know science.
Right, and that's what we see right now. There's a dismissal of science, climate change, vaccines, the regulations at the EPA are being dismantled. So we are in a state of science denial. But I think it's partly our fault as scientists, no matter what kind of scientists. We don't do a good job communicating the value of our science, how important it is to get a kid vaccinated, what climate change can mean. So we need to also do a better job speaking to why our science is so important, which is one of the reasons I was involved in the March for Science. So I was one of the co-chairs with Bill Nye, the science guy, which was really cool. But it was mainly for that. It's like we need to do a better job communicating our science, but we need more scientists to communicate to the mainstream rather than to communicate to these journalists and medias. Some people do. Any other questions about Flint? Writing a book? It's crazy. So like, when I was in college, I could have finished in 3 years, but I stuck around another year to take Arabic classes, but also to take creative writing classes. And I'm like, oh, I'll never need this again. Like, I really did need this again. So as undergrads, like, you guys have a bazillion opportunities here to take really, really cool things. So like, you know, get your feet wet and stuff that you might never think you may need, but you'll need. So take advantage of all the resources that you have here. Another kind of lessons of this book is the power of network and kind of drawing on people and drawing on folks. Like, I leaned on my friend from high school who told me about this water issue. She happened to be a drinking water expert who was at my house at a barbecue. I leaned on friends from college and from medical school and from different networks that I had. So get out there, talk to people, be involved in lots of different things because those are the folks that will be part of your villages later.
I have another question. I was curious, so in writing the book, I was curious about how you decided how much scientific information to include versus how much sort of glossing of health effects or more sort of sociological information to include. Mm-hmm. How did you decide how to strike the balance between sort of like hard science
Sure,
and soft science?
that's a great question. So in my head, the book was for students, but it was for the layperson. Like, it wasn't written for PhDs or doctors or what have you. Like, I wanted everybody to be able to read this book and pick it up and enjoy it. So Oprah Magazine put it on her summer reading list and said it had the gripping intrigue of a Grisham thriller. So like, science was a page turner. Like, how cool was that? So I wanted everybody to be able to enjoy this. So there's not hardcore. I mean, there is science, there's research, there's p-values, there's statistics. So there's a little bit of science, and obviously the science of lead, but not like textbook science. And it was difficult, but I think once I figured out who my audience was and that I wanted the audience to be broad, then it was tailored. But it was hard, and I talk about history. There's a lot of history in this book, but like I said, like really fun history, like some public health history and science history and like lead history and family history. So I felt it was also really important to put in many intersections. So it's not just a science book, it's not just a medical book, it's not just a public health book, it's not just an environment book, but it's also a race book, and it's a labor book, and it's a poverty book, and it's a justice book, and it's a democracy book, and it's an immigration book, and it's all these other things in this book that would hopefully appeal to so many folks, but also for you to know that you need to be well-rounded. You need to have exposure to lots of different disciplines, no matter what field you go into. I know so many docs, all they know is their specialty, and that they don't even remember the last time they read like a fun book or literature. So make sure that you also, like I said earlier, step out of your boxes and get exposed to lots of different things. Because you need to, I talked about labor history in the beginning, and I talked about marchers, and I talked about economics, and the book it has history of redlining and blockbusting. So all these things are critically important. We step over history every day. We step over complex systems every day. And if it's too complicated or too dark, we close our eyes. And I was always taught keep your eyes open to understand kind of the world we live in and how it came to be, no matter how kind of dark and scary it may be.
Which leads to my question, you answered it partially. I'm trying to put my shoes, myself in the shoes of our freshmen here, and students. And, I might feel overwhelmed. It's like nothing seems to be working well. The climate change is a real danger, the denialism of science, and many other calamities. So how do I deal with this? It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. It is overwhelming. But I am inspired every day, and I'm inspired by you guys. The young people are absolutely inspiring. So we have this little kid in Flint, little Miss Flint, who's her Mari Kopany. She is amazing. She's on our Flint Kids Advisory Committee. She has maybe 90,000 Twitter followers. She has done more in her 10 years of life than most adults. She got President Obama to come. She's fundraised so much money. She's done water bottle drives. She is amazing. The Parkland kids are amazing. They have done more for gun violence than any legislator, anybody else in the last 30 plus years. It's your demographic that is making a difference right now. So you can do change in little ways by voting, but all of you by voting, by being part of the democratic process, by writing letters. Writing this book made me very reflective, and because obviously there's a lot of family history in this stuff. And I found my first letter to the editor I wrote when I was a college student. It was to the Michigan Daily, and it was about the importance of service learning because I had just did an alternative spring break trip. Universities should support this so that we have lots of people when they grow up caring about each other. And that was my first op-ed, and my last one was in the New York Times. So it starts now. It starts at your ages to recognize that you have this amazing, powerful voice. And you can absolutely make a difference. And for me, those lessons were acute. So when I was a high school student in Royal Oak, next to my city was Madison Heights. We've heard of Madison Heights. So Madison Heights had a trash burning incinerator. They wanted to reopen it. I was 13, 14 years old, and we got involved as a community, my high school environmental club got involved with this real community fight. I went door knocking, community organizing. I couldn't even drive. My parents were dropping me off. Have fun, don't get arrested. And we elected a legislator who shut down an incinerator for good. So at this really, really young age, I realized kind of the power of youth activism, the connection between environment and health, the importance of good policymakers, and that taste kind of never left me. But it was kids who made the difference, and it's you guys. Your voice is incredible, but use your voice in many different ways, not only by voting, but writing letters, going to meetings, caring for each other, many, many, many ways. Electing legislators. Oh my God, look at what's her name, Alexandria AOC. She's 26, right? She's 28, super young, amazing. So I'm super, super hopeful. You guys give me hope. Because nobody's fallen asleep yet. Almost, okay. What else?
So I was wondering, I remember about a year ago when Rick Snyder decided that they were going to stop giving bottled water to Flint. And at about the same time, there was a New York Times op-ed where people who were scientists and so I wish I had written it down before I came. People who were scientists in some other areas tried explaining why actually lead is not really a problem and will never really create. Like, I'm curious why if you have thoughts about why
Sure.
there's sort of this second round of like, oh, it's not really an issue.
Denial, science
Yeah.
deniers. Garner, the last administration cut Flint's bottled water less than a year ago. This same week, they cut Flint's bottled water supply. They gave Nestle unlimited access, a permit for unlimited access to Great Lakes water for $200 a year. Exact same week, they cut Flint's bottled water. Despite getting 80,000 comments from the people of Michigan saying you should not grant them this permit, only 30 comments in support of it. So people, profits, corporations, lessons of Flint not learned. So to this day, Flint does not have resumption of bottled water. There are like faith-based organizations, United Way and other folks that are supplying bottled water, but filters are still available and in use and it need to be properly installed and maintained. Also, probably about a year ago, some scientists from the University of Michigan, a toxicologist, and some known lead deniers who are at Rutgers were also minimizing the crisis, saying kids weren't poisoned and because nobody came in with like acute symptoms of intoxication. And it really kind of is clear-cut science denial and very myopic. A lot of folks, and it really speaks to the title of the book with the ISMC, just because they did not see children coming in with seizures and comatose from acute ingestion of lead does not mean it doesn't cause a problem. It's well known to be a silent issue, and the field and the work is based on epidemiology of populations. So they were also quickly refuted. But the lead deniers are still there because the lead lawsuits are still there. The lead industry, unlike many public health evils, has yet to really pay for their crimes, unlike tobacco and asbestos, until last year in California. So the California Attorney General filed a lawsuit against the subsidiary of the lead industries, specifically the lead paint industry, Sherwin-Williams. And it was a lawsuit that claimed for damages, for really generations of damage done to children when they knew it was poisonous, yet they continued to use it to make profit. And in a very much kind of race-based way. For example, they mandated the use of lead paint in federal housing projects. They mandated the use of lead plumbing in certain areas to get water. So many states have tried before and failed, but California succeeded. And the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear their case, so it was upheld. It's a good thing. So for the first time, the lead industry, they're paying about $400 million to fix some homes in California. And right now, before I was here, I was just finishing up a letter because in Michigan, with our new Attorney General, we're trying to do a similar case because now a new precedent has been set to get that industry to pay for their crimes. But because there are lawsuits, there are apologists, and there's people that we call them rented white coats that will say anything because they're still being paid for that by the industry. And it harkens back to what I talk about in my book regarding the keyhole paradigm, the General Motors, how they put lead in gasoline, even when they knew it was wrong, but they had these scientists who kind of claimed, oh, you don't see anything, if people are fine, prove us the harm, and then we'll take it out. And that is really how, unfortunately, regulations have gone since then, because we have tons of chemicals out there that haven't been tested. Because the work to do that painstaking science takes years, if not decades, if not generations, to see an effect.
I guess I was just wondering what we as like voters and as like volunteers can do either to help Flint or to stop something like this from happening ever again.
Yeah, so what can you do? So if you want to help Flint, you can come to Flint, you can help volunteer, do different projects, or you can raise money for our Flint Kids Funds, flintkids.org. But I tell folks that you don't have to come to Flint, you don't have to help Flint. Find something that you care about and get involved. There was that awesome student who was working on the Larry Nassar stuff. There we go. If that's something you're passionate about, or if it's about literacy, it's about breastfeeding, it's about homelessness, it's about poverty, climate change, just find something you care about. There's issues all around us. There's many injustices all around us that are right outside our doors. But have that passion. Don't do something because someone else doesn't do it. Do something because you care about it. And then find your village, find your people, because other people care about it too. And you'll be able to create more change. Yes, camera person.
So I don't know if you're aware of like probably Rick Snyder's dedication to the robotics community when it comes to like high school robotics teams, FIRST Robotics. He approved a lot of funding for high school robotics teams, and as a result, those of us who were in the robotics teams, we weren't really like allowed to say anything about the Flint water crisis because he would come to events. And I remember there were some teams who tried to like say something about like, hey, stop giving money to us. We can get money from like, you know, the big three, give money to where it's needed. And we were kind of like silenced due to like the fact that he was giving us money. And so the high schools didn't want us to say
I have
anything.
a whole new take on robotics now. Just kidding.
Do you
Taking my
think,
kid on robotics camp. Just kidding.
do you think that like if he hadn't been so supportive of the engineering community, do you think that maybe things could have gotten resolved quicker if more of us felt like we could have a voice?
I think it's great that he's supporting robotics, especially kind of kids in science and math and technology. It's important, all the STEM stuff. It's unfortunate that you guys are silenced. You should be able to say whatever you want and not feel retaliation or intimidation or threat to funding of programs. I think if you read the book, it's this really weird relationship that I had with the governor. I actually saw him yesterday, but randomly I was in Ann Arbor and I saw him walking. It was really weird. But I was in my car and stuff. But the only kind of history that we had for this crisis was what happened in Washington, D.C., where it was a years-long fight and a years-long cover-up. And that's what I was planning for. I was never, ever expecting the state to concede. Never. I never, ever thought the governor would apologize and, start to do things for Flint. Never. So when he did, that was a surprise, and that was awesome. Obviously, more could have been done, and the extent of that could have been a lot more as well. People also ask me often, and I would meet with him. We had almost monthly meetings for recovery and working with his administration. And people are like, how are you working with these people? They should all be in jail. And my response was that my constituency is children. As a pediatrician, that's who I report to, is kids. So I will work with, and I continue to work with, anybody in any kind of administration, any political party, anybody who controls the purse strings, to get what kids need. And that was very, it was hard to be grounded in that, but I needed to be grounded because you can't have anger, and you can't, people, other folks in the administration would apologize to me. I don't want your apologies. I want you to do stuff for the kids. And that was very, very difficult. So he did apologize. He did commit to stuff. Mark Edwards thinks very highly of him. But obviously, there's lots of folks in Flint who think very differently. It's complicated. It could have been worse. It could have been better. The new governor has absolutely committed to Flint, committed to restructuring our environment department. She's put in 2 new positions, an office of a drinking water, like ombudsman, an environmental justice person. Attorney General is bolstering, I think, their environmental crimes division. So it's definitely a change from the last administration.
You talked earlier about putting people at the forefront of science, or people being the point of science and public health. How would you want to see curricula, undergraduate or graduate levels, change to create scientists that are doing a better job with respect to that?
Yeah, so I think more kind of experiential learning and more real world problems. And we see that, I spend so much time talking to 4th grade classes who are doing a science project, and they're Flint's a case study, but also high schools and colleges and different things. So, learning from this story, but other kind of really relevant, timely stories, I think makes science more exciting. Science also needs to diversify. So science so much, and the leaders in science, just like in many of our professions, are by and large white men, no offense to the white men. But when it's more diverse, we ask different questions and different thoughts come to the table. And then maybe there's more folks who want to work on lead or other things that are known to be injustices in certain populations. But I think there's a lot of things that can be done to make it applicable, to make it relevant, to make it more humane. And I think continuing, like I mentioned earlier, to be as multidisciplinary as possible. and to be humble about it. Like me as a doctor, like I work hand in hand with our nurse colleagues and our social workers, and we work closely with geographers and like all these different folks that are part of this family that help, the lives of folks improve. So having that kind of broad, outlook also creates more scientific solutions. Who wants to be a doctor when I grow up? What you guys all majoring in? Besides accent.
My name is Abby. I'm
Hi,
an
Abby.
English major.
English major, awesome.
Yes.
I have a whole new appreciation for English majors after writing this book.
Yeah.
When I got the book back after copy editing, I'm like, oh my god, this is where all the English majors went after graduation. Commas.
You might have talked about this in the book. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but with all of the attention and the activism that you've been practicing the last few years, I wondered if you ever considered running for public office.
I am grounded in Flint. I'm grounded in our work. Our work is really just beginning. We've just launched our registry, the Flint Registry, which I lead. It's a $15 million project funded by the CDC to identify folks who are exposed, to get them connected to resources, to follow them. My little initiative has about $20 million of projects that we're just kind of taking off. And also there's a lot of ongoing advocacy that needs to happen to make sure that we can do this work long term, but really also be able to take our lessons and disseminate them. One of the lessons of Flint is that it's not an isolated story. Like I said, there's kids all over waking up to the same nightmares of poverty and injustice and lost democracy and austerity. The same situations that make zip codes more powerful than genetic codes. Kids in Flint live 15 years less than kids in an adjacent neighboring zip code. That is not unique to Flint. That is all over this country, where environments and kind of situations predict your life course trajectory. So what we're hoping to do is really share our work, our positive, proactive work, our best practices with communities everywhere. And it's already kind of beginning a little bit. So my pediatric clinic, which sees the most Flint kids, we're on the second floor of a farmer's market in downtown Flint. We give out nutrition prescriptions because we have no grocery stores in Flint. Those get filled in our farmer's market. We robustly evaluate that. Our wonderful friends in nutrition help us, qualitatively and quantitatively evaluate that. Our U.S. Senator Stabenow, knows about that program. She knows how successful it is. She put nutrition prescriptions in the U.S. Farm Bill, and it passed, and the president signed it, and now it's a national program for kids in this whole country, inspired by our work in Flint. So that's kind of one example of how we're trying to share what we're doing all over. So when I no longer am able to influence things, maybe I'll consider running for office, but right now it's still possible.
Can I just ask a clarification question about this? So getting prescriptions for fresh food, does that mean that the fresh food is free, or because you have to still pay for your prescription drugs?
So the prescription includes a $15 voucher,
Okay.
subsidized by the Rite Aid Foundation, that they fill it in the farmer's market. So it's $15 prescription, printed
Free food.
of free fruit. Every kid gets that. If they're coming in for an ear infection or a well baby visit, everybody gets that. But we also have screening questions for like other food insecurity issues, like longer term issues, and if they screen positive for that, they get referred to our food pharmacy where they get like a longer term supply of food as well. We work with a nutrition geographer in Flint. He's an MSU faculty member who maps food deserts. And he actually came to Flint, he's from Flint, but came back to Flint to do a lot of that kind of innovative mapping of food insecurity issues. We also just launched a mobile grocery store, and it goes to places based on his maps where there's like least access to food. Really cool. All MSU people. If you want to come work with us this summer, we'd love to have you. If you want to come work with us forever, even in acting, we'd love to have you. Engineers, we need good writers. No matter what discipline you go into, you need to be a good writer. It's super, super important to be a good communicator. Acting-wise or writing-wise.
It's amazing to hear the level of deprivation. Not everyone has access to food.
In America, the richest country in the world.
In America.
Your other faculty member left because she's teaching a class on food waste, and we waste so much. And these are all choices. Like, like I said earlier, America has the highest child poverty rate of any developed country. But that's a choice that we've made. It wasn't always kids that were the highest demographic in poverty. What do you think it was a while ago? Which age population was the poorest?
The elderly.
Elderly. And what did we do to help the elderly?
Social Security.
Social Security. So we made the choice to lift elderly out of poverty, yet we have not for children. And I think it's because kids don't vote, so that's my next project, is getting kids to vote. Like some places have lowered the voting age to 16. Tacoma Park, Maryland, Washington D.C. is seriously considering it. You guys are older than 16 now, except for maybe some prodigies. But don't you think you guys should vote? My kid's 12, I think she can vote. She's really smart. Other folks have talked about proxy voting. It's called demony voting, where each parent gets a half vote per child. I don't know, something to consider.
I let my son in the presidential elections. I let my son, he cast the vote.
I know, but that's your vote. I mean,
No,
that's
he
good.
chose it.
Okay, that's great, but that's illegal. But that's awesome.
And you know how I got away with it? They had my accent. They thought I don't know how to vote. So they let
Just
me
speak
vote.
English. Yeah. That's awesome. I always take my kids with me when I vote to get them excited about their civic responsibility. But we should all be voting for our children. But wouldn't it be nice? I figure kids don't have a lobbying group. We don't, maybe if we did, then maybe we would pass policies on their behalf, and maybe we would do some work on gun control and poverty and lead issues and the many other issues that kids need. Work on that, global warming. Yeah, it's amazing. There's a girl, Greta something, and you guys know about her? In where is she, in France? Sweden. She's amazing. She's leading the charge on climate change. It's awesome. It's kids are doing it. And I get to work with kids every day. Pediatrician, best job in the world.
So my class is more or less sort of an art history class. And
Art history?
Art history.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's interdisciplinary, but we've been looking at a lot of artworks during the semester. And I was interested in your background in acting, and you
Not
also
really.
well,
High school.
but you have an interest in it, obviously, and you include a very full-fledged poem, and your title is based on a D.H. Lawrence line. And then there's, I would call it, poetry that you introduce also into the end of the book. It was, I read with great interest all of the facts and histories and whatnot, and then I got to the end, and maybe I'm a little emotional or sentimental as a person in general, but I sort of started to get a little choked up in the final
That's my
sort of
goal.
epilogue.
That's a goal.
Yeah, no, and so I was just curious about, your relationship to the arts.
Sure.
Because I think a lot of the students in this room are also College of Arts and Letters majors, and obviously the arts has been interesting to you. And
Absolutely.
I'm just curious if you could speak more to the role that you think that the arts plays, or the way that arts have influenced the way that you approach medicine.
That's a great question. So, I grew up a reader. I grew up loving to read and really valuing the importance of being well read in literature. I think you have to be a good reader to be a good writer. So I'm fortunate that I've had those experiences, and that definitely got kind of leaned into the book. But art has a role in every discipline. Several years ago, I was the director of our pediatric residency program, and a big part of our work as physicians is observation. Observation not only of our patients, to be acutely aware of what's going on with them, but also observing our learners, especially our medical students and residents, to see what they're doing. So I actually took all of our faculty to the art museum in Flint, the Flint Institute of Arts, which is a beautiful art museum coming from the heyday of Flint. And we had a class called the Art of Observation. So it was a class for doctors. You probably have seen these or watched YouTube videos. You look at a painting, and then you turn away, and you have to try to recall everything about the painting. So it just teaches you on how to better pick up on things and be a better observer. So we very much kind of lean on these other disciplines kind of to shape our work. Art has also played a tremendous role in this crisis, and it's been cathartic. Many expressions and people's ability to share their story about what happened have been artistic. There's been many plays on what happened in Flint, done locally, done nationally. There's been many art installations. There was a beautiful one here at your new museum here, and did anybody go see that one? It was amazing. It was an artist from Chicago, and you would turn the faucets of these pipes, and you would hear kids talking that coming out of the faucets. It was amazing. It was here at your museum. But many other artistic expressions. My favorite artistic kind of expression of the water crisis is something that our toddlers made. So 2-year-olds. So shortly after the crisis, a teacher from one of our toddler classrooms is like, she's like, our kids made you something. Can I bring it over to clinic? I'm like, how old are they? She's like 2. I'm like, well, what did they make me? She's like, they made you a water bottle chandelier. I'm like, and in my head, I couldn't even picture it in my head. Like, what the heck? Like 2-year-olds? And I'll try to like pull it up on my phone. But these children made something that was taller than me, which doesn't say much, but it was absolutely gorgeous and multicolored. It flowed in the wind. They had cut off the bottoms of water bottles. It was spiraling down. They were all multicolored. And I was thinking about these little kids, 2-year-olds making this, and they were like, you know, learning colors and using gross motor and fine motor skills, and they were following directions, and they were making a mess, and they were being kids like as they were supposed to be. In a high quality early education center where they were getting a nap and being loved and getting 2/3 of their nutrition, like all these other good sciencey things about how awesome it was. But most importantly, these toddlers created this artistic masterpiece that turned as something that was tragic, because we have millions of water bottles in Flint. It is something absolutely beautiful, gorgeous, beautiful. It hangs in the clinic. Whenever I see it, you can't but smile. But this is once again how our kids are leading us and telling us that we also have to do the same thing in terms of turning tragedy into beauty. So we commissioned the toddlers, and they made lots of mini ones. So they've made many, many chandeliers that we have given to folks as thank yous. For example, Rachel Maddow, she was the first person to pay attention to Flint. She was on the Flint story when it was a democracy emergency management story, before it was a water story. She got a little water bottle chandelier. Our US senators, I was at the CDC in Atlanta last week. I gave one to the CDC director. So this kind of artistic representation of kind of our work has flourished now. So art's important, just like every other discipline is important. And just reiterating again, try to be as well-rounded, take as many random classes that you can. Have fun. And I'll try to find a picture of the chandelier. You guys are awesome.
Do you have any more questions?
One more. Last question.
This might be a good wrap-up question. I kind
Great.
of just want to know how you think this is going to go down, like, in history. Like, you know, when I, you know, when say I have kids and they're reading, you know, their U.S. history book, like, do you think it'll end up in there? How do you think it's going to, like, portray in history and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's going to be portrayed for what it is, the most really emblematic public health and environmental disaster of this so far young century. And you know, it's really, even when I tell the story, and I tell the story about every day, and tell it to this day, it boggles the mind that this happened. It is unbelievable that a city in the middle of the largest source of fresh water, a city of predominantly poor and minority people, were depraved of water and were lied to and were covered up. But it's also this incredible story of incredible resistance, how people came together and how we built hope. So what I hope that the history books look at when the story is near completion is not the story of crisis, but really the story of recovery and hope that we were able to bring in. That's what I want people to remember Flint, you know, is in the next 5, 10, 15 years. So that's what we're trying to do.